Airblue Flight 202 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight departing from Karachi en route to Islamabad. On the 28th of July 2010, the Airbus A321 jet airliner serving the flight crashed into the Margalla Hills, north of Islamabad, while approaching Benazir Bhutto International Airport. All 146 passengers and 6 crew members on board were killed. The crash is the deadliest air accident to occur in Pakistan to date, and the first fatal crash involving an Airbus A321. Pakistan's Civil Aviation Authority concluded that the crash was caused by the captain's incorrect flight control input. The captain's arrogant demeanor during the entire flight caused the first officer to lose his self-esteem, making him less likely to challenge the captain's mistakes and effectively ceased any meaningful crew resource management due to the toxic work environment. The aircraft that crashed was an Airbus A321, registered APBJB. The aircraft was built in 2000 and had a manufacturer serial number of 1218. This was the first fatal crash for the A321 and the second hull loss of the type. The aircraft had originally been delivered to Aero Lloyd and used by Aeroflight before being taken over by Airblue in 2006. It had accumulated over 34,000 flight hours in some 13,500 flights. The aircraft was previously struck by lightning on the 30th of December 2008. Flight 202 was carrying 146 passengers and 6 crew members. Of the passengers, 110 were men, 29 were women, 5 were children, and 2 were infants. Among the passengers were an active duty captain of the Pakistan Army, 6 members of the Youth Parliament of Pakistan, and 3 off-duty flight attendants. The majority of the passengers were Pakistani. There were at least 4 foreign nationals, according to reports. 1 Somali diplomat, 1 Austrian, and 2 Americans were on board. Flight 202, the captain of Flight 202, 61-year-old Pervez Iqbal Chaudhry, had 25,497 hours of flying experience, with 1,060 hours on the A320 aircraft. 34-year-old First Officer Muntagibuddin Ahmed, a former F-16 Pakistan Air Force fighter pilot and squadron leader, had 1,837 hours of flying experience and 286 hours on the A320 aircraft. The flight left Karachi at 7:41 local time. Flight controllers at Benazir Bhutto International Airport lost contact with the aircraft at 9:41 local time. Weather conditions at the time were marginal, and the crew of a China Southern airliner had diverted to an alternate airport, and a Pakistan International Airlines flight had taken 3 go-rounds 30 minutes earlier. The aircraft approached Islamabad from the southeast, following a procedure that required it to fly toward the airport until making visual contact. It was then to fly around the airport to the east and north, keeping within 5 nautical miles until lining up with runway 12, which faces toward the southeast. The aircraft crashed into mountains outside the 5 nautical miles radius, about 8 nautical miles north of the airport, facing almost due west, before it could line up for the runway 12 final approach. The pilots did not send any emergency signals prior to the crash. Pakistani Interior Minister Rehman Malik stated that the aircraft was at 2,600 feet as it approached Islamabad, but went back up to 3,000 feet before eventually crashing. The altitude of 2,600 feet was above the safe minimum descent altitude. One witness on the ground, who was out walking, stated that the aircraft had lost balance, and then it went down. Others described the aircraft as being lower than it should have been. One told the New York Times that the aircraft was flying as low as a 4-story building. Someone reported that as the aircraft started to turn, the right side of its front banged into the highest mountain, emitting an instant billow of blue fire and black smoke. The aircraft wreckage was found near the Delmonico viewing point in the Margalla Hills outside Islamabad. The Los Angeles Times reported that television footage of the crash site showed smoke and burning debris, strewn in a swath cutting through the forest. Rescue helicopters hovered overhead. Fire was visible, and smoke was blowing up from the scene. The aircraft was only about 9 nautical miles, roughly 16 to 17 kilometers north of the airport when it struck the hillside. Despite being so close to its destination, a series of navigational errors and the crew's failure to properly manage the aircraft's modes caused it to drift off the protected approach path and into rising terrain, leading to the fatal impact just minutes before landing. Comparison of established procedures, track blue, and the planned track yellow and actual track red of Flight 202. The planned track included the computer-generated waypoint CF before reaching it. The crew had to enter another set of waypoints. Flight 202 arrived in Islamabad from the southeast direction, and the crew intended to land visually at runway 12. As Pakistan was drenched with rain at the time, the visibility had deteriorated to 3.5 kilometers. With low visibility, the crew had to use instrument landing for runway 30. The same runway, but in the opposite direction. Before they could land visually at runway 12, This required the pilots to circle around the runway until they were aligned. Specifically, the crew had to line up with runway 30, turn 45 degrees to the right and maintain it for 30 seconds, turn left and fly parallel with the runway, wait for around 20 seconds after reaching a beam for the threshold of runway 12, turn 90 degrees to the left, and later turn again to the left to align with runway 12. Each segment of the approach had been timed, and the pilots needed to establish visual contact with the runway first before they could land. The entire circling approach must be conducted with a minimum altitude of 2,500 feet. Surrounding the airport was an 8-kilometer-wide protection zone, which was intended to be a safe zone for pilots to maneuver their aircraft so that they would never fly into the hills located behind the airport. All said procedures for a landing were required to be conducted within the protection zone. The crew, though, managed to fly well outside it and even flew towards Margalla Hills, which was quite far from the zone boundary. The recording of the FDR and CVR revealed that the pilot in command of the aircraft at the time, Captain Chaudhry, had significantly deviated from the established procedures for an approach to Islamabad during the approach. He tried an unconventional approach by requesting a right-hand downwind approach, selected NEV mode, flew significantly close with the hills, and violated the airport's minimum descent altitude. At one point, he could be heard laughing off the order from the air traffic control to enter a holding pattern and wait for the weather to improve, saying, "Let him say what he wants to say." He was also heard dismissing his first officer's concern on establishing visual with the airport, as he believed that no visual contact was needed as long as they had engaged the autopilot. According to the recording, the captain initially did not feel anxious about his decision to deviate from the standard procedures for an approach to Islamabad. He even stated his intention to initiate the turn for a lineup with runway 12 at a distance where the aircraft was dangerously close with the hills. As a result, the Ground Proximity Warning System, or GPWS, sounded several times to warn the crew on their impending collision with terrain. In the last few seconds, Captain Chaudhry panicked and eventually caused the aircraft to fly directly towards the hills, rather than avoiding them. While numerous deviations from the standard operating procedures happened, the co-pilot of Flight 202, First Officer Ahmed, was largely unresponsive and passive about them, even when the aircraft was put in a dangerously close position to terrain. The recording showed that he had only voiced his concerns on limited occasions. As such, the deviations were never corrected. His muted behavior could be explained by the conflict that had happened on the initial segment of the flight. During Flight 202's initial climb, Captain Chaudhry decided to use this particular time to test First Officer Ahmed's knowledge. Unsatisfied with the result of the test, Captain Chaudhry berated his co-pilot and humiliated him in a harsh, snobbish tone. This lasted for about 1 hour. By the time Captain Chaudhry decided to stop, First Officer Ahmed had become quiet and submissive. He had fully lost his self-esteem, enabling Captain Chaudhry to freely do any violations from the standard procedures without any suggestions or corrective actions from the far less experienced Ahmed. Captain Chaudhry's feeling of superiority was also shown later in the approach phase of the flight. He decided not to follow the ATC's suggestion to wait inside the holding pattern and dismissed his co-pilot's concern regarding establishing visual contact with the runway, despite this being crucial for the approach procedure. If the pilots had not established visual contact, abandoning the approach was required. He also continued the approach when the aircraft was already outside of the protected zone. When the GPWS sounded, he still continued the approach, despite the low altitude of the aircraft and warnings from his co-pilot. He also told First Officer Ahmed to falsify their ATC report when the controller asked on whether they had established visual contact. The Pakistan Civil Aviation Authority immediately launched an investigation into the accident. Airbus stated that the company would provide full technical assistance to Pakistani authorities. A 6-member Airbus team, headed by Nicholas Bhatta, the company's director of flight safety, arrived in Islamabad on the 29th of July 2010. The aircraft's flight recorders were located on the 31st of July. When Junaid Amin, the Director General of the Pakistan QA, told AFP, the investigating committee found the black box from the Margalla Hills this morning. The black box was found from the bulk of the wreckage of the crashed plane. He stated that the box would be examined by foreign experts in Germany or France, as Pakistan does not possess the equipment to decode the flight recorders. He also stated that the process of extracting information may take 6 months to a year. The Pakistani authorities decided to send the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder to the Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety in France. Captain Chaudhry's constant testing of First Officer Ahmed undermined his confidence, leaving Chaudhry largely unchecked in controlling the aircraft. During the approach, ATC denied his repeated request for a right-hand downwind entry, so he initially complied but later disobeyed procedures by engaging the Airbus A321 NAV mode, which was not permitted for approaches. The A321 system had 2 modes: selected mode, where pilots manually set headings using the knob standard for circling approaches, and managed NAV mode, where the autopilot follows pre-programmed waypoints. By choosing Navi mode, the aircraft searched for unsuitable waypoints outside the protected zone. Yet Chaudhry created additional waypoints and insisted on following them. Ahmed, lacking confidence, did not object. As GPW's warnings sounded, Chaudhry delayed corrective action. When he finally attempted to switch to selected mode, he failed to pull the knob properly, leaving the plane stuck in nav mode. In his confusion, his adjustments caused the aircraft to turn right directly towards Margalla Hills. Despite last-minute attempts to pull up, the aircraft struck terrain. Ahmed repeatedly warned of the danger, but Chaudhry, disoriented and overwhelmed, lost control, leading to the fatal crash. The report issued by Pakistan's CAA in November 2011 cited a lack of professionalism in the cockpit crew, along with poor weather, as primary factors in the crash. In particular, the report noted that the CVR and FDR confirmed that the captain ignored or did not properly respond to a multitude of air traffic control directives and automated terrain warning systems. The report also claimed that the first officer passively accepted the captain's actions, after the captain on multiple occasions throughout the entire flight took a harsh, snobbish, and contrary tone with the first officer and berated him. The report concluded that the crash was a controlled flight into terrain accident, in which aircrew failed to display sufficient judgment and professional skills in a self-created unsafe environment. In their determination to land in inclement weather, they committed serious violations of procedures and breaches of flying discipline, which put the aircraft in an unsafe condition over dangerous terrain at low altitude. Representatives of family members of passengers on the flight questioned the validity of the report and the qualifications of those who carried out the investigation. In 2012, following extensive scrutiny from the public and officials regarding the report's lack of quality, Peshawar High Court ordered the Pakistani government to reinvestigate the crash with assistance from the Counternational Civil Aviation Organization. The revised report was eventually sent to ICAO in November 2012, but ICAO expressed disappointment with the final report, describing it as incomprehensive. They stated that the investigating authority, Pakistan's Safety Investigation Board, is not independent and issued a recommendation to independently revise the final report. Following the crash of Flight 202, Airblue promised family members that a memorial would be erected. The memorial was to cost 20 million rupees, and the final design was finalized in June 2011. The memorial was eventually constructed near Monaco. On the 10th anniversary of the crash, Islamabad authorities planted 152 trees along the track of Yadgar-e-Shuhada. The trees were to represent the number of people who were killed in the crash. Airblue Flight 202 remains a tragic reminder of the importance of safety, clear communication, and mutual respect among peers in the cockpit. Proper training and discipline are essential to prevent such disasters. May the souls of those lost rest in peace, and may such tragedies never repeat. Don't forget to subscribe to Black Box for more aviation documentaries and investigations.